preference about reading or first or second, Elizabeth? I can
No.
go either way.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
No strong feelings one way or the other.
Nope. Do you care?
I don't care either. Maybe do you want to start with you, Jenny, and then we'll
Okay,
just,
sure.
yeah, and then we'll have Elizabeth read.
Sounds good.
That'd be cool.
Taking the fingerprints off my glasses.
So you're in the Michener Center, right?
Yes, I teach it. There are two programs here, and I teach in both of them. They're really one program administered by two departments, but yes.
Is Brett Anthony Johnston still
Yeah,
in the program there?
he's the director there here at the Michener Center.
That's what I thought. He came here a few years ago and he was just wonderful. So I knew he was at Harvard and then I knew he had switched. So cool.
Been here maybe 5 or 6 years. This might be his fifth, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always wanted to come out to that program. I hear the students are so good at in Austin. Yeah.
I'll put a flea in his ear. I was actually thinking we've a couple of times gotten people. I was thinking, if I had but known the New Writers Project, which is the other program, which doesn't have deep pockets. We got Lydia Davis because she was reading at San Marcos,
Nice.
and we sort of went, "Oh, okay, we'll give you all the money we have."
Yeah, hop and skip.
But I'll mention it to Brett. He makes all of the decisions.
Sure. No, that seems fun.
But our students would love to work with you. I know. So
cool. All right. So
yeah, I think I'll just go ahead and start here then. And so first off, we'll just begin with thanking everybody for showing, whether it be live or joining us for the recording after the reading. This is our 6th installment of our reading series this semester. And we've had a great roster of writers come, and that includes today, in which we have Elizabeth McCracken and Jenny Offill, who will be sharing their work with us in just a moment. But first, I want to thank just a couple people, because this doesn't happen by itself. Des Moines Area Community College, of course, who sponsors our reading series, and Jim Stick, who is the Dean of Liberal Arts, who has kept this series going for almost 2 decades now. And we have kind of co-conspirators of our local bookstore, Beaverdale Books, who has supplied all of our books for the last 2 decades as well, and including this year. So I just want to thank everybody who has had any part in putting this together. But without any further ado, we'll begin with a small introduction, and then we will have a little conversation, a little Q&A with questions that students have provided to our writers. And then each of them will read for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll end with a Q&A, kind of bookend the reading. So in the meantime, if you are here live and you have questions, go ahead and throw them into the chat or put them in the Q&A drop box, or you can also email me if you know my email address, and that's fine too. Some people want it to be private or something. So I've had a lot of emails that come through. But first off, I would like to introduce our writers, Elizabeth McCracken, who is the author of 7 books. Here's Your Hat, What's Your Hurry, The Giant's House, Niagara Falls All Over Again, An Exact Replica of a Figment of My Imagination, Thunderstruck, Bowlaway, The Souvenir Museum, and her forthcoming novel entitled The Hero of This Book. She's received grants and fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the National Endowment of the Arts, the American Academy in Berlin, and the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study. Thunderstruck Other Stories won the 2015 Story Prize, and her work has been published in the Best American Short Stories, the Pushcart Prize, the O. Henry Prize, the New York Times Magazine, and many other places. Joining her is Jenny Offill, who is the acclaimed fiction writer whose debut novel, Last Things, was named a New York Times notable book and a finalist for the LA Times First Book Award. The New York Times named her second novel, Department of Speculation, one of the 10 best books of 2014, and her latest novel, Weather, was published in 2020. Her critical work has appeared in the New York Times Book Review and Slate. She is the co-editor of multiple anthologies and the author of a number of children's books. Her honors include a Stegner Fellowship, Guggenheim Fellowship, and New York Film Academy Fellowship in Fiction. She's previously taught in MFA programs at Brooklyn College, Syracuse, Columbia, St. Lawrence and at Vassar. So I would just like to thank both of you for joining us here today. And, you know, we've actually had you on our list of writers who we would love to have here. And it's so nice to actually see you guys together in the same space, even if it's a virtual stage. So thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having us. It's really fun to be part of such a long running series.
Absolutely. Yeah. I really appreciate that. Maybe we can begin. Part of the reasons why we're excited to have each of you individually is that when you're in the same space, you guys seem to have a very similar voice, even though you have a very distinct style from one another. So I guess maybe we can begin with a question about influence, and who, whether it's literary or not or otherwise, who would you say has like influenced your voice or informed it on the page? Jenny, do you want to talk to us a little bit about your voice and any influences you've had?
Sure. I mean, I feel sometimes like your early influences are very strong. And certainly when I first started writing, I was influenced a lot by like the poet John Berryman, and by sort of the New York School of Poetry. The I did this, I did that kind of school of writing. And then, you know, I think I dove deeper into some of the modernist writers like Virginia Woolf and Jean Rhys. But in more recent years, I would say it's been people like Lydia Davis, Joy Williams, Claudia Rankine. All of those have, I feel like, brought a little bit of something to the style that I was maybe looking for or trying to find. And I also am kind of influenced by comedians sometimes. I really like the comedian Maria Bamford, and I'm sometimes wondering, you know, about how to get that kind of deadpan delivery on the page.
Awesome. Elizabeth, who would you say is your influences?
I always worry before I talk about influences, because I think that somebody is going to say, "Oh yeah, you wish," like that person has anything in common with your work at all.
Okay, then I'm taking back Virginia Woolf.
No, I see. For you, I see it. For me, I'm just always seconds away from writhing on the ground in self-loathing when it comes to talking about my writing. Grace Paley was certainly one of my first and most important influences. And she was given to me when I was in graduate school. I hadn't known her work before that. And there were a lot of people who I think I read when I was in graduate school whose fingerprints are all over me. She's one. And my teacher in graduate school, Alan Gerganis, is another, as well as Sue Miller, who was my teacher when I was an undergraduate student, not because they told me to write like them, but because I just would have done anything that they said, and I read their work at the same time. And Carson McCullers, I think of as being a big influence, but I also think I love stand-up comedy too. And I also, when I was first taking myself seriously as a writer, I still read a fair amount of books, comic books. And I think I'd like to claim like Walt Kelly and Alison Bechdel and Linda Barry as influence as well. And Linda Barry, of course, writes prose as well and is a wonderful novelist. But those are maybe some of the mine. And Gish Jen, who is somebody who I still remember reading my first story of hers in Best American Short Stories when I was just applying for graduate schools, and have read everything since. And there's something about the way I've read her work now over 35 years or something like that that's been intensely important to me.
Yeah. I want to second the Linda Barry shout out, because my computer, which is really on its last legs, is being balanced right now by two Linda Barry works. And I'm hoping nothing will go wrong, but my computer has lately decided that if it is pushed past a certain point, that point being very mysterious, it will just shut down. So everything is balanced very, very carefully. And Linda Barry is the key.
Holding it together. That's awesome. So maybe we can talk a little bit about humor, because that is kind of like a part of both of your work. And we were curious about how humor, I don't know, how do you approach humor in your work, and how do you kind of balance it without it becoming jokey, and how do you balance darkness and lightness of the humor? Elizabeth, do you want to maybe begin thinking about, as comedians, are both of your guys' influence?
Sure. I mean, truly, I wouldn't know how to keep it out. I sometimes write something that I think is just desperately sad and grim, and people will say, I just laughed and laughed. And I've learned not to take that personally, but to understand that reflexively when I'm writing, humor gets in. There's no way to keep it out. And I also do think this is how I feel when I read other people's work. That's certainly how I feel when I read Jenny's work, that anything sad amplifies humor, and anything funny amplifies the sadness. I sometimes think of, when I read work that has no humor in it, I feel like it's like a sealed dark room, and there's nothing that can throw shadows because there's no light. And that's sort of how I think about sadness and humor. You actually need the humor to throw the shadows so that you can apprehend what you're looking at. For me, it doesn't work otherwise.
Mm.
Awesome.
And yet it's not as common as you would sort of expect it to be in literary fiction in certain ways, I find. I mean, sometimes I've done something like I've judged a prize or something, and I've been actually surprised how few of the books, in any way engage with that kind of world. I don't know if it's because the idea is that your sense of humor is so subjective, and like, what are the chances that the judge or whoever will be is not going to be interested in it. But I mean, I also think I've just always been a sucker for a sad, funny book. I mean, that is sort of, I remember reading, Jesus's Son when I was in like a freshman, and just thinking it was so funny. Like, there were just so many lines in it that just made me laugh, and I still think of them. And the same with Joy Williams and many other people. And so I think that when I'm writing, especially because I myself am kind of a depressive freak and have been most of my life, that has always been how I tried to lessen my own darkness, I guess. Not that you think consciously about it; it's just how it goes. And I've always been friends with people that's what they do. In fact, I finally figured out that when I come back from a party and I've met someone and I'm trying to figure out with my husband what I think about the person, and if I'm saying, well, they're perfectly nice, they were very nice, and then it'll dawn on me that they were absolutely humorless, otherwise completely nice. And that's why it was such hard going to make conversation. But I know that when I'm writing, I sort of have a rule that I don't, if I'm writing something, I don't underline it as funny. If it's funny, it's funny. But that thing where someone tells you a joke and they're like, oh, you got to hear the story, it's really, really funny. It's kind of a rookie mistake, right? You don't want to set it up like that. And I'm sure this has happened to you too, Elizabeth. I've been places where people laugh at a lot of things, and I've been places where it's totally dead silent, and you just kind of don't know which way it's gonna go.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. I think that's like, you always hear about stand-up comedians, and the only way that they can like test the materials on the road, and sometimes it's all about like embarrassing yourself to figure out what's going to work, and then sometimes things hit and you don't know. Thinking about humor as part of your voice, stylistically, you guys are pretty idiosyncratic, and so I was in a lot of it has to do with like breaking formal rules or traditional rules of fiction. So maybe we can begin with like Jenny, and how we can think about your layout on the page, how you use white space. The last few novels that you've written have been in a very fragmentary, almost collage kind of style. And so can you tell us a little bit about how you implement that, and maybe how it speaks to the content that you're working with?
Yeah. I mean, my very first novel is much more traditionally densely kind of written on, it looks on the page. It still kind of has the nested stories within it, where one is within one is within one. But I think with Department, I just felt like the narrator was, I wanted her to have a sort of galloping manic energy, that, we often can have in a moment of disruption or something changing drastically in our life. And so I first was thinking of the white spaces as actually just a place where the reader could pause. Like, how could I have this first person voice that wasn't just so claustrophobic, because it was so, that the movement of thought was so quick. And as the book goes on and is sort of more and more of a becoming a bit more unhinged, I felt like the white spaces were also, again, stopping places, but also a place where the reader could kind of add their own associations. And then secondly, I'm really interested in a writer in compression and distillation, maybe because I started out more reading poetry. I'm not one of those people that wants a giant, 700-page book to read. I mean, the funny thing is I'll read something like that, but it'll be on some bizarre research subject that I'm interested in. It's always nonfiction. So for me, the white space also means how to put things on the same plane, like things that might seem like they're, oh, that's the serious part and that's the like more trivial part. I'm just interested in kind of what it means philosophically to create some kind of system where, at least on the page, you're allowed to go from one state of being or one sort of continuum of emotion right into another shading.
Interesting. I was thinking about it when I read the last couple of books, and when they use that kind of like that fragmentary aspect, and I like your idea of putting everything on the same plane.
Mhm.
When you actually construct the novel, like structurally, how do you decide? I mean, there is a narrative arc that follows through the book, but there is like a lot of, kind of asides. So how do you decide how to like put one segment next to another segment? And do you kind of like, do you think about it as like a collage, or do you write it in order?
I don't write it in order, although I have periods where I write a whole part, like a whole part comes together. Um, but I guess in terms of how they go together, um, the only thing that really truly tells me if something goes together is time, because I will put things next to each other and see how I feel about them. And then almost always I decide no. I either decide it's too on point, it's too, or it's too, because of course the obvious difficulty with the kind of writing I do is that if you do it wrong, if there isn't enough rigor to it, it just looks random, right? It looks like any piece could go in. So that's sort of my final arbiter of what I've done. Is like, could I pull this piece out and another piece could go in, or is it doing something to the things surrounding it that I need to be done? But in terms of how I write it, I often I do write it in those small pieces, and then I work to get the sound and the cadence and the feeling of it right. And then I don't necessarily know where it's going to go for a long time. And then later on, I make, sometimes I do like kind of a chance operation. I put up boards of different things, and I go to this is something I just picked up from like visual artists and poets I know, that at a certain point it can be useful to like allow an element of chance in to sort of jog you out of your received ideas. But it's an incredibly inefficient way to write, because basically I'll do all that and I'll maybe get one really excellent, like surprising juxtaposition out of it for like days and days, and my whole floor is covered with things. So I mean, I wouldn't recommend it as a system if you can write all the way through in drafts and then, pare it back down. But I wish I had, long drafts and then could pare it down. I just can't seem to proceed except at the sentence or paragraph level until the very end, when the bigger picture kind of becomes clear.
Right. But that's impressive because it reads so seamlessly, but yeah, a lot of work goes into making it look so seamless. Elizabeth, do you want to talk to us a little bit about how you approach your work, we're noticing when we're reading your work in class, how you maybe even approach endings is that every time it feels like the story ends, you always have like, you go a little bit further and sometimes you break the fourth wall or you switch a point of view or you jump in time. And can you just speak to us a little bit about how you experiment with these like traditions in fiction?
Yeah, I'll do my best because the older I get, the more I realize I do almost nothing on purpose when I write. I might think purposefully when I'm away from the page or the screen, but when I'm actually writing, I'm terrible at giving craft talks because I feel like I don't think about craft whatsoever when I'm writing. And so I too am a very inefficient writer. And I think even though I don't spread it out on the floor, I have to write a draft of something and then go, oh, okay, that's what the story is about. I feel like one of the things that's happened to me, maybe in the past 10 years when it comes to writing short stories, is that I had my first full-time permanent teaching job, the University of Texas. I taught quite a bit before that, but I moved around and writing and teaching felt very separate to me. And then I started teaching at UT, which is where I am now. And I would tell my students that they shouldn't be constrained. I would tell my students that I actually felt that there were no rules for their work except for the ones that their work set up, and that was the rigor that that they needed, but not that I didn't really believe there was such a thing as a shapely story. The story could be shapely, but it would be its own shape entirely. And I feel like I started to listen to myself a little bit, and that and it was interesting because then teaching and writing became very close to each other in a way that they hadn't been for the couple of decades in which I did both beforehand. And so I think a lot of those things where I go, something happens at the end, is because I'm sort of paying attention to that I feel like I want to go where the story is going, not where a story would go in that place. And it's been really fun. The one thing I have to do is when I'm putting together a collection of stories is to make sure that like I don't have a flash forward at the end of every single story. Because I love when I read them in other people's work, I just think, oh, that's so great. I love that so much. I love stories that are really fluid in terms of time and point of view. And that aren't, I went to graduate school in the late 80s where common wisdom said that there were just things that you couldn't do in a short story. And now I am very happy to believe that there's nothing you can't do in a short story. And that's my process is, I'm basically Mr. Magoo in a car driving anywhere I want to and being very happy.
I still get very excited when someone does a flash forward well. I feel like it's sort of the double axle or something like spin. Like it's hard. I've seen it, not where I don't like it, but if I like it, it's so good that I just remember that you can leap through time and space. And that's one of the reasons to be a writer. So, I myself am not always, I was just thinking about it in the new thing I'm writing about. I was like, I think I'm going to do a flash forward here. And it still felt kind of, I was once paired somewhere that I taught with another teacher for a week, and we had exactly opposite teaching styles. I would come in the classroom after he had taught, and there'd be all these diagrams on the board and all of these like, no, you can't do, and it would say things like, no flashbacks longer than a page, no this, no that. And then my because they were beginning students, so they were thrilled by all these rules because they thought it might, don't we all wish that there was a way in? But I'd have to sort of kind of undo that idea because I just don't believe in it at all. And if if you read a lot, you can immediately, when you hear one of those things, think like, yeah, but what about how so-and-so did it? But it was just funny because I would, over the years where I taught, I would sometimes have this guy's students in my class, and there would always be a scene that I would cut in one of their stories because it would just be sort of strange and not in a good way. And it was always a scene where they were at work. because he did not believe that you could write a story where you didn't show the person at work. So, you know, and so it's just funny because I didn't make the connection till the end of the semester that like I just kept being like, why are we in the office now for a random 10 pages?
Do you know, I think one of the reasons that those rules can be tempting is that they're designed to prevent writers from making mistakes.
Yes.
And I think that that's
And they work
also
that way, I think. They do. They often work to.
Yeah, but who wants to read a story without mistakes in it? And
Yeah.
I also think that's why young writers sometimes aren't funny, because they feel like they're going to do it wrong. If you want to write a story that's just really dour and grim with no humor in it, that's actually quite easy. You'll accomplish it. It might not be good, but you can do it. But people think that they'll mess up humor, and so they avoid the mistake.
Yeah. I often find that students have written something funny a little bit without realizing they have. They've just let their voice come in an area, and I'll be like, oh, that part just made me laugh. It was so good. And they'll be like, oh, really? That was the part I was worried that I should have taken out. So I do feel like your writer brain is sometimes smarter than your analytical brain, and like what it will let in versus what you are imagining something should be.
That's true.
Interesting. I love that conversation. Now, maybe it's a good time for us to hear a little bit of your work. Elizabeth, would you like to start us off and read to us for about 10 or 15 minutes?
Sure. I'm just going to read a few pages from this novel. I'm doing that because I'm not sure what it is. I'm committing to calling it a novel. And it's called The Hero of This Book. And this is just a few pages, maybe in the middle of the book, with the narrator's mother has just died, and she's coming to see an estate sale. The day before the estate sale, I let myself into my parents' house. Everything had been minutely rearranged. There were tchotchkes I'd never seen set out on tabletops, art in unexpected places on the wall. Nothing had been priced yet. From the time I'd handed the key over to the estate sale guy until after the last customer, he was in charge of everything, had photographed it, and had advertised it. The agreement I'd signed said the family was allowed to be present for the sale, but that some people found it upsetting. I wasn't upset. The downstairs was in pretty good shape. My mother had paid to clean it. Anything upsetting was over my head. The house felt wrong, I could tell that, but I could no longer remember what went where, what objects had gone to what relative. This was a better order, I understood, arranged to draw people in because now, for the first time, the purpose of the house was to admit strangers. It was a public sale. The public would come. All those things now for purchase, what I'd grown up with and what had been in boxes for years. This wasn't a mere estate sale. It wasn't a single estate. It was a fossil record of a family, though incomplete. When my father's parents' house in Des Moines was closed up in the late 1980s, he let movers fill a truck full of furniture and bring it to Massachusetts. I remember the day I walked into the house, I'd moved out by then, to see the towers of end tables, one on top of another, each tower with a pleased cat at the top. Eventually, some boxes were taken to the basement and tables drifted into corners where tables made sense. A few years later, my mother's apartment was taken apart. My mother's twin sister was in every way her opposite and wanted almost nothing. My mother, being my mother, wanted everything. Plenty had been dispersed. The considerable remains were for sale. By the next morning, the estate sale crew had come through and put on prices. I tried not to absorb what they were. Outside, a line of people waited for the sale to start, a collection of human oddities, by which I mean antique dealers. I could smell the low voltage excitement and nerves. They'd heard that the lady who lived in the house had been here 40 years. There were a lot of antiques. Look at the state of the place. Probably a lot of trash inside. Maybe something really amazing hidden under the trash. You just had to get in there and lay your hands upon it. The estate sale people had set up card tables at the back of the house with a cash box and some of the more valuable items. That was the checkout. You ready? The main guy said. We'll start right at 9. Let him in and out through the laundry room. I think so, I said. Good crowd, he said. I think it's going to be good. What would my mother have thought? She liked flea markets, but she wasn't much on yard sales. Too much dross, she might have said, but also she could never be sure of the terrain. Maybe this was why my mother had no interest in cemeteries or ending up in one, despite a love of the morbid. She collected mourning jewelry, including chains woven out of hair of the dead. She made dark jokes. Too many steps without banisters in cemeteries. Too many stones on the path. When I'd asked her what she might like to happen after she died, she said, I plan to die on trash night so I can be put out in a hefty bag. Also, she was a cheapskate. She disapproved of spending on the dead what could go to the living. At 9, the dealers were let into the house. Soon enough, they came out arms full. I'd looked at nearly everything in the house before hiring the company and had taken what I wanted. Some books, some art, most of my mother's jewelry, which filled 2 suitcases. And I was surprised by what I felt now. A lady in a black wig and a pink fanny pack set 2 teapots on the table, and I thought, but I want those. A man came out with a pair of Bert and Ernie puppets, and I thought, mine. If something was cheap, I thought, I might as well have kept that. If the estate sale company charged a surprisingly high price and it sold, I thought, if I'd known it was worth so much, I would have kept it. But I had my own accumulation, my own dumb things I should get rid of. What I felt wasn't overwhelming. It was fine. I wasn't watching the dismantling of my parents' house, but a peculiar endorsement of their taste. I'd imagined that being here would seem like simply another piece of the work of my mother's death. Cremation, hospital bills, get the lawn mowed, arrange the memorial, call the old friends, find a realtor. But the estate sale was oddly cheering. It would not only pay for the cleaning out of the house, which would have cost thousands of dollars, but it meant all these weird things, the collections and unlovely heirlooms, would belong to somebody else. Somebody told me you're the daughter, a woman said to me. She was in her 40s, doe-eyed, familiar though I knew we hadn't met. I just have to say I was overwhelmed with emotion inside. Somebody was Jewish? Yeah, my mother too. I just felt when I was in there, these people loved this house. I could tell they were interesting, right? I bought a piece of art. I was so drawn to it, a mid-century charcoal of a woman. It's probably by my aunt, I said, my mother's sister. She's an artist. We have artists in the family too. I can't explain it. I just saw this and I was drawn to it. Can I show you? From her husband, she got a pile of papers, some old maps, an aged issue of Punch. Then she extracted a drawing by some excellent artist unknown to me. It was captioned in the basement. That's my mother, I said. I've never seen this drawing before. Her eyes were cast down. The artist had captured her heavier lower lip, her long nose, the eyebrows. I could feel the woman's eyes on me, but also those of the guy in charge of the estate sale who'd made it clear everything in the house was for sale. No takesy-backsies. I hadn't even known that this drawing existed. I wished she hadn't shown it to me, that I had been kept ignorant. Do you want it back? She asked. I'd never had it in the first place. No, I lied. Are you sure? 1954, I said, looking at the date. She was in college. Do you want it? But I have always been bad at answering such questions. I wanted her to give it to me. I felt full of artificial generosity for not snatching it back. It's fine, I said. I wondered how much it had cost her. Probably $1 or $2. She was a very nice woman. She just didn't know me. My mother, the confounding optimist, always said that her greatest regrets in life were things she didn't buy. Then again, she was better at answering simple questions than I was, and at clearly saying what she wanted. The estate sale crew, the boss and a friendly lady with a thick Boston accent, and 2 or 3 other young men stood behind the folding tables with the valuable items. Some jewelry, cameras. My father had owned hundreds. These were the priciest. A small archive of papers about the founding of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, which my father must have got at an antique store. Some foreign money, a painting of a sideshow by a great aunt, boxes of toys. The drunk neighbor came by. She was a nice woman whom I'd never seen sober, about my age, with doleful blue eyes. She hugged me, as she had the other times we'd met. It was still the age of casual hugs. We stood together in my mother's driveway, and she said, "You'll always remember her." "Yes," I said. "Love doesn't end with death." "No." "Like my son," she said. "He's been dead 14 years now, and it's like it was yesterday, that kid. He was such a good guy. You know about my son. He finished college and he said, 'Ma, I'm going to New Zealand.' You know, he was young. So he went to New Zealand, and he went everywhere on a motorcycle. Wasn't crazy about that, but everywhere he went, he wrote. Pictures, here we are, pictures of the ocean. He surfed. Then he was staying with friends. And one morning he woke up, and I guess he forgot where he was, and he opened the door and he stepped out, except there wasn't anything out this door. It was just a straight drop down, and he fell. And he was there for hours. And the lady who found him, oh my God, said my mother's drunk neighbor, with the smile of a person speaking about the theoretically unspeakable, who only wants you to listen. I have worn that smile myself. My God, I feel so sorry for that lady. The decanter sold, but none of the teacups. The art sold, but none of the furniture. Some books. My parents had never used this back door. No banister, too small. A large, unkempt man came through it, clutching some china figurines that I had last seen in Des Moines, Iowa. Big head, squared Joan of Arc haircut. He looked like a nerdy ogre. "People," he said. I was up there, and some guy turns to me and says, "This place is a dump." And I tell him, "Listen, this is somebody's home. Respect. Respect. You don't know. You don't know the whole story. Maybe there's not family there. Maybe they don't have kids looking after them. Sure, it's not ideal, but you don't know. There were old people living here. You can tell that. Sad stories everywhere. Could happen to you." He laughed, stepped off the little concrete stage to the driveway. "I'm telling you, man, families." I'll stop there.
It's great.
The last line. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Can you read for us for a few minutes there, Jenny?
Sure. I'm going to read a little bit from the beginning of this novel, Weather. And it just starts with the main character is a librarian in a university library, and just kind of noticing her usual people coming in and out. In the morning, the one who is mostly enlightened comes in. There are stages, and she's in the second to last, she thinks. This stage can be described only by a Japanese word. Bucket of black paint, it means. I spend some time pulling books for the doomed adjunct. He's been working on his dissertation for 11 years. I give him reams of copy paper, binder clip, and pens. He is writing about a philosopher I have never heard of. He is minor, but instrumental, he told me. Minor, but instrumental. But last night, his wife put a piece of paper on the fridge. "Is what you're doing right now making money?" it said. The man in the shabby suit does not want his library fines lowered. He is pleased to contribute to our institution. The blonde girl whose nails are bitten to a quick stops by after lunch and leaves with a purse full of toilet paper. I brave a theory about vaccinations and another about late capitalism. "Do you ever wish you were 30 again?" asked the lonely heart engineer. "No, never," I say. I tell him that old joke about going backward. "We don't serve time travelers here." A time traveler walks into the bar. On the way home, I pass the lady who sells whirling things. Sometimes when the students are really stoned, they'll buy him. "No takers today," she says. I pick out one for my son, Eli. It's blue and white, but blurs to blue in the wind. Don't forget quarters, I remember. At the bodega, Mohan gives me a roll of them. I admire his new cat, but he tells me it just wandered in. He will keep it, though, because his wife no longer loves him. "I wish you were a real shrink," my husband says. Then we'd be rich. My brother's late, and this after I took a car service so I wouldn't be. When I finally spot Henry, he's drenched, no coat, no umbrella. He stops at the corner, gives change to the woman in the trash bag poncho. My brother told me once that he missed drugs because they made the world stop calling to him. Fair enough, I said. We were at the supermarket. All around us, things tried to announce their true nature, but their radiance was faint, and fainter still, beneath the terrible music. I try to get him warmed up quickly, soup, coffee. He looks good, I think, clear-eyed. The waitress makes a new pot, flirts with him. People used to stop my mother on the street. What a waste, they'd say. Eyelashes like that on a boy. So now we have extra bread. I eat 3 pieces while my brother tells me a story about his Narcotics Anonymous meeting. A woman stood up and started ranting about antidepressants. What upset her most was that people were not disposing of them properly. They had tested worms in the city sewers and found they contained high concentrations of Paxil and Prozac. When birds ate these worms, they stayed closer to home, made more elaborate nests, but appeared unmotivated to mate. But were they happier? I asked him. Did they get more done in a given day? The window in our bedroom is open. You can see the moon if you lean out and crane your neck. The Greeks thought it was the only heavenly object similar to Earth. Plants and animals 15 times stronger than our own inhabited it. My son comes in to show me something. It looks like a pack of gum, but it's really a trick. When you try to take a piece, a metal spring snaps down on your finger. It hurts more than you think, he warns me. Ow. I tell him to look out the window. That's a waxing crescent, Eli says. He knows as much now about the moon as he ever will, I suspect. At his old school, they taught him a song to remember all its phases. Sometimes he'll sing it for us at dinner, but only if we do not request it. The moon will be fine, I think. No one's worrying about the moon. The woman with the bullhorn is at the school door this morning. She's warning the parents not to go in, to leave the children there behind the red line. Safety first, she yells. Safety first. But sometimes Eli cries if he's left in that loud scrum of people. He doesn't like having to walk alone from one side of the huge cafeteria to the other. Once he froze in the middle until some aide grabbed him by the elbow and pushed him towards his corner. So today we make a run for it and dart past to get to his assigned assembly point. His friend is at the table and has animal crackers, so I make it out of there without tears, but not before the bullhorn woman screams at me, no parents may accompany their children. God, she loves that bullhorn. Something shoots through my body at the sound of her voice, then I'm out on the street again, telling myself not to think. I'm not allowed to think about how big this school is or how small he is. I've made that mistake at other drop-offs. I should be used to it now, but sometimes I get spooked all over again. All day long at the library, cranky professors. I swear, the ones with tenure are the crankiest. They will cut past other people in line to check out a book or set up their hold list. Studies have shown that 94% of college professors think that they do above average work. They gave me a guide the other day, tips for dealing with problem patrons. The professors weren't mentioned. There were the following categories: malodorous, humming, laughing, defacing, laundering, combative, chattering, lonely, coughing. But how to categorize this elderly gentleman who keeps asking me to give him the password for his own email. I try to explain that it is not possible for me to know this, that only he knows this, but he just shakes his head in that indignant way that means, what kind of help desk is this? Oh, did we lose Mark?
That was wonderful.
Thank you.
The ones with tenure are the worst. I read the book, but I had forgotten that.
I just thought that was funny that all the professors say they do above average work. I'm totally that. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, it's 100% true. We all absolutely believe it.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So it looks like maybe Mark's.
Is there any chance you can hear me?
Now. So
yeah.
Are you back?
I can hear you. Okay. I can't hear you, but I can see you. And I don't know why my speaker isn't working, but my mic is. Okay. So I'll be trying to figure this out as we progress.
Okay.
So I don't mean to interrupt you if I interrupt you. So we had a question here about process, right? And so maybe we can start with Elizabeth and talk about this idea of how do you approach the short story and versus how you approach a novel, and what are some different ways that you kind of like think about the process of those two different genres?
Yeah, it's, you know, the biggest difference for me is there are probably a lot. They do seem very, very, very different to me, and that I can hold a whole short story in my head. I can think of what it's going to be, and what I write is going to be pretty close to that initial concept. But also, I can think about a short story for weeks before I start working on it. And then when I don't have to take a single note. I just think about it, hold in the head, write it. It's close to my idea. And with novels, I can, if I spend weeks thinking about it, the minute I start writing sentences, I understand how wrong I was. What an utter fool I was, thinking that it was going to be this kind of novel about this sort of place with these sorts of people. And that feels sort of hugely different to me. And that I can sort of will a short story into being. And it's a very specific pleasure. And novels are much more mysterious to me. And I'm a more efficient writer when I write short stories, and novels are much more, I love them. It's a much more I think novels are actually in a way easier because they're much more forgiving as a form. They're baggy, or at least mine are. My novels are baggy and forgiving, and I can fit all kinds of things that I want to into them. Yeah, for me, that difference.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I had a similar question for you, Jenny. Maybe we haven't mentioned your children's book yet. And,
they're so good. They're so great. But Sparky, it's Sparky. Yeah.
The illustrations are so good. I didn't do the illustrations. They're very awesome.
I think the story is good too. I was wondering how you, well, maybe you can talk a little bit about, you already talked a little bit about how you approach your novels, but I was like curious about how you approach children's books and like what kind of frame of mind you have to be in, or how do you collaborate with your illustrator, or just anything you can ask about that.
Yeah, children's books were just something. I mean, I never actually thought that I would write one, to be honest. I wrote my first one when I did not have any children. I was not married. I lived alone and had really very little contact with small kids, which is why I guess I wrote the first one, which is called 17 Things I'm Not Allowed to Do Anymore. It was perceived, at least by some readers, as quite scandalous in that it did not have enough of a message or a moral to it. And it was just something that I was just lucky. An editor had read my first novel, which part of it's in a child's point of view. And I think they were interested a little bit in like pushing away the like sweetness of a lot of children's narratives. And, I think that at least I remember myself as a young kid, there was just like a feral quality. I was definitely like I was more creature than human, for a lot of years. And so I was thinking about if there was a way to bring that kind of thought and energy into it. But in the beginning, I just did it for the money. If I thought it through, I probably might have put it under a different name, and sort of made my my worlds feel more separate. But what turned out to be really great for me about children's books was they also, you have to compress them to such a huge degree, because I do picture books and I actually don't collaborate at all with the illustrator other than picking from the options that I have, because I feel like I just try to write in such a way that a good artist would maybe be able to pick up on what I was thinking. But with Sparky, for example, the guy who did it had never done a children's book before, but he was someone who, like, he did the storyboards for the fantastic Mr. Fox, and he was really great. But he's the one that thought to put the sloth like hanging like over the branch. That's not how sloths hang, but it was so great. And I would never have been able to come up with that. So I usually just try to respect that they have the visual intelligence, and I'm bringing the verbal stuff. But yeah, but then, then I had a kid, and I became aware of how tedious a lot of children's books are, and how incredibly happy you are if one that you have to read over and over again is pleasing. I can remember reading Go Dog Go and just being like so pleased on this zillionth time I read it that I got to say, I like your hat. I do not like your hat. Goodbye, goodbye. It was like, so, yeah, I try to I try to sort of think, I don't think kids really need storybooks to like give them moral instruction. I think they need it to be a place to kind of wander freely. So so that's also what I bring to it, I guess.
So my wife is a preschool teacher, and so she read your book as well, and she was like, "It's so sad," but I was like, "But it's also so funny." And so,
Yeah.
and it's like,
I know people keep wanting me to write a sequel to it, but it's sort of like, I don't know, it sort of ends on the it does end on a melancholy note.
Yeah, it ends on a melancholy note. I just love that last line. I'm not going to give it away, but it made me like crack up.
Well, for what it's worth, my editor, there's a moment in the book where this girl who she has a pet sloth, and she's trying to make it be more exciting because the other kids are making fun of it, and she tries to plan the sloth extravaganza. And at one point my editor did say, well, why don't you have more, like, what if this happened, and what if, I was like, no, the whole point is that none of it happens, because I just can remember that feeling as a kid of doing a show. It's just like there was like nothing went the way you thought it would be, and you couldn't like convince everyone to do your will. So yeah.
They can't all be big dog parties in the tree.
It can't, no, they cannot.
Go Dog Go is the best.
I know. I've never been to a party as good as I feel like it set a template for me to be disappointed my whole life.
Plus, like sloths don't do much, and I guess
they don't do much at all. Yeah. It's funny. A few people got really angry, though. Apparently, someone told me in Goodreads, because the book suggested that you could get a sloth in the mail. And I guess they thought it said, my sloth arrived by express mail, which is just its simplest, tiny little joke. But then people were like, children are going to try to order sloths. I was like, well, good luck. Like, if your child manages to order a sloth, like, you're going to have to applaud their.
Until they read Flat Stanley.
Yeah, I don't
know. Which maybe leads into like another question that we had, because about research, and this can go into obviously several different places, but maybe we can begin with you, Jenny, because it's staying factual to how a sloth actually acts versus how you want it to act. And your book novels are just full of like little pieces of trivia and factoids. And how do you incorporate research into your work, and how do you not have it overtake your work? And we'll have a similar question for Elizabeth in a minute.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that I am very unsuccessful in letting it not overtake my work. The only rule I have for myself is that I try not to do online research, because at least if I'm doing it in a library, yeah, I just find that I wander sort of into more interesting places somehow for my means. But I mean, as far as I can tell, reading research, like for the last book, I read all this survivalist literature. I read like, it was funny, but I mean, not funny, but like anytime there's any kind of disaster that happens in the world, I realized like I have a book on my shelf that has been written by someone, trying to tell you exactly what to do in that situation. But also I read, again, so inefficient, I probably read like 10 books about climate science, all to put, exactly one fact about climate science in the whole novel. But for me, it's just writing is so hard, and often it goes so badly, and I swing constantly between just immense grandiosity and then like incredible self-loathing, and there's just like no middle ground. And so when I'm researching, I can sort of have that like steady feeling of working. And it's not as dependent on when I research, I also type out whole like pages of books. And I do that because I had a friend once who was a painter, and she said, I feel sorry for you writers. What do you do when you're stuck? And I said, oh, you just sit there and you're miserable and you just stare at your screen. And I said, why? What do you do? And she said, oh, I stretch canvases. And I just thought, what's the equivalent? And for me, like typing things out that I want to learn so that they'll stay in my head more, is what I do when the writing isn't coming, which is often.
Wow, I love that. I love that advice. Elizabeth, do you have views on how research works? And actually, this might, as a follow-up, one of our students was asking about setting and how they loved all this different, like in your latest collection, all these great settings, Legoland, water parks. And I guess we're also thinking about research as primary sources when you go out there into the world and incorporate into your work.
Yeah, this novel that I have coming out is probably the only novel that I've done almost no research for at all. I have a novel that takes place largely in Des Moines, which is where my mother is from and where my parents met. It's about the last days of vaudeville, and I did a ton of research for that. And I essentially, I choose topics that I think will be fun to research, that allow me to watch a lot of movies. And I watched a lot of movies for that book, and also went to a lot of archives and read a lot of magazines. And I used to be a public librarian as well. So I love microfilm and big bound volumes of magazines. And I generally research beforehand and then do almost no research while I'm actually writing, sort of research on a need to know basis after that. I love the question about setting, because it's something that I've really changed my mind about, or at least I've made things easier on myself. I am remarkably unimaginative, which is something of a failing in my line of work, but if I don't really think about setting ahead of time, the world will be very pale. And that I'll be desperately looking around my own office trying to figure out some object to write about. And I've discovered in the maybe past 10 years that the world is very, right when I leave Texas, the world is very vivid to me. I married to an English person, and we go to England, but also to other countries. And I find myself out of context and in a different place. And I have that ridiculous thought of which is, oh my gosh, I'm thinking much more interesting thoughts now than I am when I'm at home. And I'm not. I'm thinking the same thoughts, but they look really nice against the yellow of Legoland or the gray of the stones of a Schloss in Denmark. And I have found that if I set stories in a place that I'm fundamentally interested in, then I know what my characters might think and do in a way that I don't if they're somewhere familiar. If they're somewhere familiar to me and maybe familiar to them and comfortable, they are really likely to sit down on the edge of a bed and take a nap, which is also my own tendency. But if they're somewhere interesting, they're likely to do something interesting, say something interesting, or encounter somebody. And so if for me lately, setting is really where it begins and what leads to plot and character development and everything.
And we had in your last collection, you had a water park that was like a German themed water park. And did you, that place actually exists? Because we have one in Iowa as well.
Really?
Yes.
Yes, 100%. Well, yeah, because there are a lot of German immigrants in Iowa too. Yeah, 100%, including that there's a slide called Faust und Furious. I did not. I'm really like, I have no imagination. Practically anything that is in my work that you think, how did she come up with that? 100% I did not.
Reality, right? It's like stranger than fiction. So we'll have one last question maybe to end on. And this is thinking about process as well. And one of our students was interested in like, what is a bad habit that you have in your writing process and that you maybe still struggle with? And how do you either avoid it, break it, or maybe use it to your own benefit? Jenny, you want to start us off?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think I have a lot of bad habits, some of which went away as I got older and had less time. So I'm a much less of a procrastinator, I suppose, than I used to be because my writing time is more limited. But I would say that I have a bad habit of working on a book for a long time and then hearing that someone else is writing a book about something similar, even though what I'm writing about is basically like, I don't know, someone went to the grocery store and bought something there. And I'm just like, this is just no new ground to cover here. I think I'm just going to be done with this. And I have these little moments where I just lose my nerve, I lose my nerve. And the only thing that I've, or just if I'm away too long from a novel in particular that I'm writing, it doesn't make any sense to me anymore. Like what I thought I was doing doesn't make any sense. And ultimately that can be helpful, but I now write some notes at the end of, when I'm working on something, because I always have this idea, I'll work on it tomorrow. And then, something intercedes and I don't. But sometimes I can tell from the notes more what I was thinking. And even if I'm still deciding to swerve in a new direction, it's not quite as wholesale as maybe I did when I was younger. And I would say like my other bad habit is just, it's really, really important for me to read a lot. Like if I don't read a lot, I mean, if you've ever been to a bad reading, I sometimes have this feeling if I'm at a really bad reading where I just think, why do people write things? Like, why do we read? Why do we, just it's so flattened out. I just can't remember. And so it's important to me to like remember to read. They don't have to be new books. In fact, they often aren't, but books where the writer is just so much better than I am as a writer that reading them is invigorating and depressing at the same time.
I was thinking about your article that you wrote about Mrs. Dalloway and kind of revisiting that over the years, which I love that article because I love Mrs. Dalloway. It's one of my favorite books. And I teach it all the time. So I love going back into those old books like you were mentioning and finding
it is funny. I mean, there's a couple books like that. For me, Revolutionary Road is the same way. And like when I first read it, I just obsessively was like, oh boy, is this guy really gonna, do the thing that he thinks he's gonna do? He thinks he's like gonna have some artistic life, but is he just gonna get stuck? And I was like obsessed with that. And then the next time I read it, I was like, oh, his marriage. He thinks his marriage is so bad. It's not and then the next time I was like, he's mean to his kid, but he's not even noticing how mean he is. And then the last one I was like, he's gonna lose his mind completely. Each time that's all I focused on.
Yeah.
And it just was obviously about different ages.
4 books in one.
Yeah, indeed.
Elizabeth, can you speak to us about your bad habits too?
Oh yeah, I think my biggest bad habits, just textually, is that at the end of everything, I have to write a list of the words that I have used 5 million times. And recently it's been palpable. For some reason, I just love the word palpable. They're the usual suspects like tiny and pale, which I think every writer I know loves, both tiny and pale. Words of scale, I always have to go through and address. And the other bad habit, I mean, also like I put dolls and puppets into my work too much. Like I'll put them in purposely and then I'll just like use them as metaphors continually until it becomes like a really creepy dollhouse sort of thing, which, I like, but not everybody does. And the other thing, my other big bad habit is that I sometimes struggle to get my characters to talk to each other. And the way that I have countered that, like I used to have a line in everything I wrote that was something like, I opened my mouth, but I couldn't think of what to say. And I kept putting that. And I'm like, well, maybe you should say something then. And I now compose all of my dialogue without quotation marks and without gesture. And then I put those things in second. And it has changed my work.
That's a good idea.
That's so great to hear that. Like it's so relatable. I have the same issues. I love your thought on this idea of like being preoccupied with certain words or themes that my students are often worried about that. And I'm like, well, maybe that's also called your voice, and that's what you should embrace it.
Yeah. I think your bad habits are your voice to a certain extent. Those the way that you like to punctuate or the certain lulls and cadences.
Absolutely. Well, that might be a wonderful note for us to end on. Thank you so much for spending the time with us. Both of you guys have been wonderful, and hopefully everybody in the audience or when they watch the recording are taking notes because you dropped some wonderful wisdom on us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. This has been great.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Jenny.
It was a treat to get to do an event with you, Elizabeth.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, great. Hope to see you in the real world one of these days.
Hope so.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.